May 1940. On the beaches of Dunkirk, Hitler's army surrounds more than 400,000 Allied troops. On the other side of the Channel, in England, Navy planners race to assemble a fleet of ships to launch a rescue mission. Luftwaffe fighter planes circle above the beaches, targeting their easy prey on the sand below. As the Nazi noose tightens, hundreds of civilian vessels join the largest military evacuation in history. In this series, we investigate the most extraordinary events of World War II from a brand new perspective. Matching rarely seen archive film, photography from the front line, and remarkable aerial reconnaissance images to their original locations. We reconstruct the crucial battles. Daring bombing raids and deadly terror weapons that changed the course of history. Soaring over the battlefields, we reveal the secrets of World War II from above. April 1940, Dunkirk in northern France. All is quiet along the sprawling beach. But not far to the south of this small coastal town, the Allied armies are spreading out for hundreds of kilometers along the Belgian border to set up a defensive front. Since the war broke out in September 1939, almost 400,000 British soldiers have arrived in France. They've been working with the French forces to set up World War I-style defenses to ward off potential attacks from the Nazis. But on the 10th of May, Hitler's army launches a sudden and massive invasion on the neighboring countries of Belgium, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands. They use a tactic known as blitzkrieg, which combines vast numbers of tanks, infantry, artillery, and aircraft to stage highly concentrated attacks. This allows Hitler to overwhelm even the most organized of Allied defenses. As the Nazis steamroller to the west, Allied forces surge forward to stop the advance. Hitler's blitzkrieg tactics allow his armies to move at astonishing speeds and create a pincer move. This onslaught completely takes the Allies by surprise, creating panic and triggering a mass withdrawal towards the coast. Almost 500,000 Allied soldiers retreat to the beaches between Dunkirk and Le Pan in Belgium to try to escape. Most are British, but there are also Belgians, Dutch, and French. Many have been split up from their units as they race towards the coast. One of the soldiers that reaches the vast shoreline is Private Ronald Mott of the Queen's Royal Regiment.
I had hit the beach at Le Pan, and there were so many men coming down all roads to get to the beach. You got pushed and shoved, and you got parted, and you got lost. We were all scared. There was no navy. We didn't know what was going on. It was complete chaos. Thousands upon thousands of men in the beach. And nobody's getting off.
Former Royal Marine Arthur Williams explores the beach at Dunkirk to understand the dire situation the Allies face.
Arriving on the beach must have been terrifying for the troops, because thereafter you've got nowhere to go. In the military, we train to be on the offensive. We train how to attack. We train to always be moving forward. We never really do any training on how to withdraw safely or how to withdraw effectively. This is a battered army that's been defeated, not really knowing where they're going, what they're doing, and why. One thing that strikes me is the scale of the beach here at Dunkirk. I mean, right over there on the far horizon, you can literally see into another country. That's Belgium over there. And then down there's the harbour town of Dunkirk itself. Imagine how terrifying it would have been. If somebody decides to come and try and have a go at you, there's nothing you can do about it.
The Luftwaffe is quick to exploit this vulnerability with one of its most potent aircraft, the Stuka. These are extremely accurate precision dive bombers, armed with 3 7.9mm machine guns and 5 bombs. It's also mounted with an instrument that produces a terrifying sound. Its sole purpose is to strike fear into the Allied forces below as the plane dives towards its targets.
These aircraft were fitted with what's called a trumpet of Jericho. It's a siren that makes a horrendous noise when the aircraft starts its dive. And these sirens don't do anything for the airplane's operation. It's just purely to terrify those on the ground who it's about to kill.
The soldiers are easy targets. The only way they can defend themselves is with their rifles, but they stand little chance against the Stukas.
The Stuka dive bombers overhead were like vultures circling around, waiting to just come down and pick off their prey. They had a choice of targets. They were spoilt for choice. They could have gone for anything. From a soldier's point of view, I think that they would have tried to stay in the dunes as much as they could, because they offer you relative safety. You can dig in there and you've got a bit of cover from bomb explosions and shell explosions.
It's not just the Luftwaffe circling above that threatens the lives of all these soldiers. If the Allies can't find a way to slow the advancing German ground troops, almost all the British Army could be wiped out. The retreating soldiers set explosives on sluice locks, bridges, and all critical infrastructure. They build rudimentary defences and barricades on roads to set up a defensive front. The local canals and rivers can also be harnessed as obstacles to slow the Nazi tanks and infantry. The men race to use these waterways as part of a defensive perimeter, to hold back the German advance and buy some precious time. But on the 25th of May, the nearest of the Nazis' forces are only 27 kilometers away from the Allied beaches between Dunkirk and Le Pan. The rear guard is ordered to fight to the last man. This should buy the Allies some time, but it won't hold the rampaging German forces for long. time is running out, and the Nazis' noose is ever tightening. The Allied commanders must find a way to rescue their men from the dunes and get them off Dunkirk's beaches. If they fail, it will almost certainly mean total domination for Hitler across Europe.
These guys know that their area is just being squeezed smaller and smaller and smaller by the day, by the hour, by the minute. The Germans are getting closer. This is make or break. This is do or die right here.
In Britain, evacuation planning has begun. Since the start of the war, Dover Castle has been set up as a top-secret command centre for the Navy. In May 1940, it's on the front line of one of the most pivotal moments of the millennium. Beneath the castle lies a network of secret tunnels, many of which were excavated into the chalk during the Napoleonic Wars. In these tunnels, a team of 20 senior officers has just days to coordinate one of the biggest evacuations in history, codenamed Operation Dynamo. Dr. Lynette Nussbacher investigates why these tunnels have been chosen to be the crucial nerve center of operations for the Navy planners.
The naval staff is here bunkered up in the tunnels underneath Dover Castle because this enables them to communicate directly with the senior naval officers running the ports along the coast here. These guys are used to serving at sea, and so the cramped quarters that these guys are used to working in aboard ship are just being replicated here underground. You're going to have a room here for communications, a room for logistics, a room for each of the functions of the staff. The people down under Dover Castle are innovating. They're making it up as they go along. They are working around the clock. Nobody expected the Germans to encircle the British Army. Nobody expected the Germans to be winning the war so quickly. The only way to prevent a German victory in May of 1940 is to get the British Army off the beach in France and bring it back to England.
One of the Navy's top commanders, Vice Admiral Bertram Ramsay, is Commander-in-Chief for this Herculean operation.
Ramsay is just the right man for the job. He's able to bring his keen intellect and a technical orientation to solving this problem. Bertram Ramsay's task here in Dover is to coordinate things on a scale that nobody has ever done before. So Ramsay's staff has got to figure out how to get enough ships to France to load up that whole British Army and get it back to Britain.
Ramsay has a fleet of more than 200 ships at his disposal, including destroyers, minesweepers, and passenger ferries. But even with all these vessels, they face formidable logistical challenges when they arrive in France. German bombers have been targeting Dunkirk's harbour. There's no way the British Navy ships can use these docks for the evacuation. Naval officer Captain William Tennant devises an ingenious plan. He proposes to use Dunkirk's kilometre-long breakwater wall, known as the Mole, as a makeshift dock.
Tennant and the officers in charge here managed to maintain a cool head under pressure. With the situation they found themselves in here, it would have been easy to dwell on what they didn't have. They didn't have the infrastructure that they needed to get hundreds of thousands of troops off the beach. So what they had to do was think outside the box and look at what they did have and adapt to that and work with it.
But there's a problem with Tennant's plan. The Mole was not designed for ships to be able to dock at. It's less than 3 meters wide and is exposed to the rapidly shifting tides.
It's a breakwater. It's just a sea defence. It's not built to have large ships moor up alongside it and troops and supplies shipped on and off.
It's a risk, but it's the only option. On the 27th of May, the Navy's vessels begin docking alongside the breakwater. But with limited space, some of the destroyers are forced to drop anchor off the beaches. They must remain almost 1 kilometre offshore to avoid running aground on the shallow beach. With the Luftwaffe continuing to circle above, the warships are tantalizingly close. The thousands of soldiers on the beaches are desperate to board the Navy vessels so they can escape. So they leave the relative safety of the dunes and wade out towards the ships anchored offshore. But here, they are completely exposed. With the water up to their necks, they form queues and wait for hours. But their hopes of salvation are mercilessly dashed. The huge Navy destroyers prove easy prey for the Luftwaffe Stuka bombers. One of the men submerged in the water is Royal Artillery gunner James Bradley.
The dive bombers were, knocking the ships out, and there were terrible things happening. I saw a destroyer absolutely packed with men on board hit, and it just went on its side, and hundreds of men went into the sea, thrashing about. Many of them couldn't swim on shore.
The attacks forced the men on the beach to retreat back into the dunes. Out of a force of almost 400,000, the Navy planners estimate that at best, they'll only be able to rescue 45,000. Barely 1 in 10 men. Back in Dover, the Allied planners scramble to find ways to evacuate more of their men from Dunkirk's beaches. If they fail, Britain itself will be left all but defenceless. In desperation, Vice Admiral Ramsay and the Navy requisition smaller civilian vessels. The Medway Queen is one of the many boats being sent to Dunkirk. It's a 55-metre-long paddle steamer. Built in 1924, it's designed for pleasure cruises up and down river estuaries. To prepare the ship for war, engineers have fitted 2 anti-aircraft machine guns in the middle of the deck. They've also extended the bridge and enclosed it for protection, and installed a huge gun on its bow that fires shells weighing over 5 kilos. On the 27th of May, the ship set sail for Dunkirk. Trustee Pamela Bathurst investigates the challenges the crew of the Medway Queen faces on such a treacherous mission across the Channel.
The Medway Queen is an estuary paddle steamer and should never go to sea. She's not big enough to go to sea. But of course, in times of war, all sorts of things happen and, you know, rules and regulations are forgotten.
The crew is led by Royal Navy officers and reserves, but it also includes 14 merchant seamen.
The crew were extremely brave. Some of them were Cornish and Devon fishermen, so had no experience of fighting a war. The English Channel is a tough crossing to make because you've got fast-flowing water through the channel. You had mines, you had German planes dive bombing them, so it was a very dangerous time.
Vice Admiral Ramsay and his advisors believe that smaller vessels like this could be the key to speeding up the evacuation.
All the paddle steamers had very shallow drafts, so could get very close up into the beach. Not quite to the beach, but get very close.
Mercifully for the men stuck in France, the Medway Queen isn't the only merchant vessel to set sail for Dunkirk. Ships of all shapes and sizes depart from harbours around the coast of Britain. They include fishing boats from Cornwall and luxury motor yachts commandeered from their wealthy owners. More than 600 civilian vessels join the flotilla and begin the perilous voyage across the Channel. They are christened the Little Ships. One of the motor yachts that makes the crossing is Mimosa. Former owner Jane Percival is on board the 14.5-metre long Little Ship.
Within a very short space of time, the Ministry of War Transport put out a request for any vessels from 30 feet to 100 feet. And with some boats, just like this one, a note was left on a mooring that she'd been requisitioned and they would get back in touch with the owner after the war. So, although it was put out as a request, it was actually an order and you couldn't stop them taking the boat.
Even though most of these ships have Navy crews, they haven't been trained for an operation like this. And nothing can prepare the civilian volunteers on board for what they're about to experience.
They were going into a war zone and these pleasure boats became warships. The majority of the boats had fully qualified naval staff that knew these waters, but they still had to skirt around boats that had been sunk and boats that were on fire. They had to worry about the aircraft, they had to worry about whether they might be torpedoed. They had to plan a crossing where they could avoid all the minefields, so it's a kind of a zigzag route, not a direct route.
To negotiate the Channel's sprawling sandbanks and hazardous minefields, the Little Ships take 3 different routes. Route Z is the shortest, at 75 kilometers, but is vulnerable to heavy fire from German gun emplacements near Calais. Route X is 101 kilometers and runs right through the shallow sandbanks and minefields. Route Y is 161 kilometers and relatively free of mines. But it's twice the distance of Route Z, which heightens the risk of attack by German bombers and submarines. All the little ships are headed for the heart of the Allied-held beaches between Dunkirk and Le Pan. Nearby is the Fort de Doon, a key stronghold supporting the shrinking defensive perimeter. Buried beneath the sand dunes that surround it, the Fort de Doon is designed to be invisible. Resident specialist Lily Soki scales the fort to investigate why it's so valuable to the retreating Allied forces.
The fort is camouflaged. There are 4 to 6 meters of sand above the fort, so it's well hidden. As you can see, we are very close to the dunes and the beach. We are only 800 meters away from the beach. There's a huge panorama, and it's a perfect place to defend a territory because you can see the enemy coming from all sides.
In May 1940, soldiers come here to find their units amongst the chaos. The fort is being used to coordinate the French troops holding the defensive perimeter. After receiving fresh orders, they're sent back out to reinforce the front line. They're instructed to defend the perimeter to the last man. "28th of May, 2 days into the evacuation. Nearly 25,000 Allied troops have now been rescued. But hundreds of thousands remain in Dunkirk as the Luftwaffe air attack continues. The situation is just as dire for the Allies on the ground further inland. Their defensive perimeter is under attack and shrinking fast. The Allied-held area is 1/6 of what it was just 3 days earlier. In the harbour, the Sandpol oil refinery is on fire. It billows smoke that drifts across the beaches, providing some cover from the Luftwaffe for the men below.
The scene here would have been almost apocalyptic. The sky would have been thick with black, acrid smoke, and the smell would have been equally as menacing. There would have been signs of death. I think it would have been an incredibly scary place to be.
But all is not lost. As men continue to wade out into the water, specks appear on the horizon. The sight of the little ships delivers fresh hope to the desperate soldiers. But loading thousands of men onto hundreds of vessels of all shapes and sizes is a complex and time-consuming exercise.
As they reached Dunkirk, it was chaos, and there were ships everywhere. The little ship's role was to actually head for the beaches where they could see the men in the water waiting to be rescued. They were avoiding obstacles, they were avoiding wrecks, they were avoiding fuel that was on fire in the water. From the skipper's point of view, obviously they wanted to be as effective as possible, so they had to choose a point on the beach where there was a line of men and then start to pull them on board. The skipper would have been very aware of managing the weight that was in the boats. To get 70 men on a boat that should only take 12, you could probably fit about 40 outside on the decks of this boat and another 30 down below. It was a case of just loading on as many as you could, because every man saved was another man that could fight another day.
Boat crews haul the exhausted men on board. But they're then faced with heartbreaking decisions.
The traumatising thing for the skippers and the crew must have been when to decide not to pull anyone else on board and to leave. And they would have had to say to them, no more, someone else will be here to help you, we'll be back.
The soldiers devise innovative ways to board the little ships as fast as possible. Evidence can be seen from above. A super low tide exposes the remains of vehicles buried deep in the sand. Local resident Yves Janssen examines the sunken artifacts.
It's a part of a truck, probably a Bedford. As you can see from the front wheels of this truck, it has not been used for many kilometers. The tires are still in good condition. Dunlop, reinforced for heavy service. All these trucks were used to make pontoons during 1940. And all the trucks available, they were brought on the beach, and the people could walk on it and reach to the boats without swimming.
The soldiers drive trucks as far as possible into the water and lay planks of wood over them to create the makeshift jetties. They assemble multiple pontoons along the beaches, which keep the men dry as they board the small vessels. 2 days into the evacuation, little ships are setting off back to Britain, packed to the brim. Thousands of men may finally be on their way home. But on the land, Hitler's tanks and infantry move ever closer. And in the air, his Stuka bombers target the rescue ships, docking alongside the mole. "29th of May, 1940. Allied ships dock alongside the mole, 3 days into the evacuation from Dunkirk. But as the men board the ships, they are far from safe. Nazi Stukas continue to attack the makeshift jetty, which stretches for a kilometre along the edge of the harbour.
I think being on the mole, they would have been so vulnerable. It's a perfect target. It stands out like a sore thumb from the air. It's very linear, so you can strafe it, you can bomb it. And because the troops are so tightly confined here, they'd have been trapped. They'd have been sitting ducks, really.
As the Stukas dive, the men scramble onto the ships to try to find cover.
The thing is, once you get on board one of the ships, you could be forgiven for thinking, great, I'm safe now, I'm on my way back home. But no, you're not. You're still vulnerable to air attack, and arguably more so because you're on a prime target for enemy aircraft.
One of the ships docked at the mole is the paddle steamer, the Crested Eagle. It's loading up with 600 men, but just as it sets sail, it's targeted by a Stuka. Four bombs land directly on the Crested Eagle. Corporal Bob Bloom, a probationary medical attendant, is on board.
The next thing I heard was abandoned ship, so I jumped in the water. And as I came up, somebody else jumped in and pushed me down under it. Then a whaler came alongside, and two chaps pulled me inboard, and they covered me with a tarpaulin.
As Bob is hauled out of the water, the Crested Eagle is ablaze. With its engine still running, it careers out of control along the coast until it beaches on the sand, roughly 9 kilometers from the mole.
I present you what remains from the paddle steamer Crested Eagle. The ship is something like 90 meters long. Here we are about in the middle of the ship. All what we have here up to the front of the ship was on fire. All the people who were there, they died. 300 people died in the fire. What has happened here was terrible. When the bomb fell in the engine room, the oil tanks were broken, and that was creating that big fire. When the ship came to the coast, all the soldiers who were here on the beach, French, English, all ran to the ship to give assistance. But for many of them, it was just too late. Few of them survived, but very few.
For the men still stranded on the beaches, it's a traumatic thing to see. But there is hope. Despite the risks that they could meet the same fate as the Crested Eagle, the other little ships continue to ferry the beleaguered men back to Britain. Each crossing takes on average 6 hours. Many of these vessels sail at night to minimize the threat of enemy attacks. On the front line in France, the number of Allied soldiers on their defensive perimeter is dwindling. They're making a last stand to prevent the Germans finally storming the beaches. But they won't be able to hold them for long. The Allied perimeter around Dunkirk has shrunk even further. By the 31st of May, the Nazis' front line is only 10 kilometers from the beaches. But before Hitler's troops can go in for the kill, they must capture Fort de Doon, the final Allied stronghold. French soldiers desperately tried to hold on to this vantage point, to buy the men on the beaches more time. On the 2nd of June, the German front line is so close, the Allies can see it from the fort. General Johnsen is in charge of the division here.
General Johnsen went to the top of the fort to observe the front line. His mission was huge because the perimeter was pretty close, and his main job was to protect the eastern front of Dunkirk.
Early evening, German Stukas attacked the fort. 2 bombs land in the courtyard.
The bomb that was dropped in this courtyard caused shrapnels, which killed General Janssen and many of his officers.
The Germans continued to bomb the fort for 2 days and kill over 100 soldiers. On the 4th of June, the surviving troops abandoned the fort. As the perimeter crumbles, the little ships continued to collect as many of the remaining soldiers as possible before the beaches are overrun. But more than 200 of these small vessels are sunk during the operation. The Medway Queen is one of the last to leave. On the steamer's final trip, one of its paddle boxes is damaged whilst moored alongside the mole. But it limps home, carrying hundreds of members of the French rear guard. The crew and soldiers on board even managed to shoot down 3 enemy aircraft. The Medway Queen makes a total of 7 trips, rescuing over 7,000 Allied troops. But over 80,000 men have been left behind and taken as prisoners of war. There's a somber mood on board as they return to England. The surviving soldiers are traumatized, hungry, and feel like cowards. The sight of home brings some solace, especially for those badly injured.
Somebody would shout out, "Look, there's the White Cliffs," and the wounded begged to be lifted up to the window so that they could see the White Cliffs. They just wanted to see that they were going home, and they were going home.
Thanks to the efforts of the Navy and these little ships, 338,000 men escaped from Dunkirk. 7 times more than Churchill and the Admiralty thought was possible. As the soldiers arrive in Britain's ports, it's then time to treat the wounded. The men are crestfallen after defeat by the Germans. But these men survive to fight another day. Their courage and determination in the face of adversity gives birth to the phrase Dunkirk spirit. Britain will not have to surrender. On the 4th of June 1940, the final day of the evacuation, Churchill addresses Parliament.
We shall go on to the end. We shall defend our island, whatever the cost may be. We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender.